Well, it's finally time to compare the two small adventure bike juggernauts, that is the CFMoto 450 MT versus the Himalayan 450. So let's get into this. It's a little long-winded, but remember, it's your own fault. You asked for this. You wanted me to break this down, so boy, have I done so. Which bike does what better? Which bike suits what kind of rider? And ultimately, is there a winner between both of these little beasties? The CFMoto 450 MT, you really need to think about it basically as a mini Tenere 700. And the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 really is the KLR 650 Gen 3 that we deserved. The CFMoto sounds amazing with its 270-degree crank, and it gives the bike a whole lot of character. And that is immediately apparent when you throw a leg over it. This bike gives a great first impression. Whereas the Himalayan has the dependable chug of a single cylinder. And it's more of a slow burn that does grow on you over time. The Himalayan is one of those bikes where you need to give it a little bit of time for it to be able to show its true colors and what it's really good at. Whereas the CFMoto 450 MT is just, it's bombastic. It immediately makes an impression and you immediately know what the bike is all about. The 450 MT has a parallel twin, and importantly, it's a 270-degree crank. It's pumping out 43 horsepower and 44 Newton meters of torque. And the Himalayan is a single cylinder, liquid cooled, pumping out 40 horsepower and 40 Newton meters of torque. Put simply, the CFMoto 450 has the better bottom end, and it also has a much better sound. There is just something about a parallel twin with a 270-degree firing order. But in saying that, little Himalayan really punches above its weight. It actually has the better mid-range, and by a big margin has a much more engaging top end. As I said, I found the CFMoto had the better bottom end, but it's a very linear power progression from there, so it's very predictable. You never feel like you get a rush of power or an extra kick at any point in the RPM other than that initial punch taking off from the line. The Himalayan has that dependable chug from the engine, and this is really a Jekyll and Hyde engine because it's docile low down, deploys its power very forgivingly in the lower RPMs, and it doesn't have the same chug ability that the CFMoto 450 MT does. Right down low in the rev range, you don't get that instant kick of torque, but it definitely is enough, but it doesn't compete with the 450 MT. But it is great for off-road because it is so tame, particularly if you're a first-time rider or returning rider. This is going to be a very easygoing motorcycle to get along with. But what the Himalayan does best is it switches up character in that middle RPM. Once you cross 5,000, 5,500 RPM, you really start getting this meaty mid-range that really carries you along. And as you hit peak power, it really is a rush. This bike is an absolute blast to ride hard in the twisties. They're both fun and engaging in their own way. It really just is about what you want out of the engine. The short answer is both do it without breaking a sweat, but they do it in very different ways. The Himalayan has the better overtaking power, particularly here in Australia, being that you're at 110, that's right when maximum power is about to kick in, so when you need to overtake, it's right there for you to go. The 450 MT is not far behind and is no slouch considering the size of its engine when you do need to get past trucks out on the open road, but the Himalayan does feel a little stronger and a little more engaging at those speeds. The 450 MT is by far the smoother engine at those speeds. Vibes do start to creep in and they are noticeable at 110 plus. The bike is so butter smooth below that it's amazing, and above that it's just a little bit of vibration, particularly when you compare it to the single cylinder of the Himalayan 450, which has noticeably more vibrations at that 110 and above speed limit. I have had a few Himalayan owners get back to me saying some of that vibration really does dull down over time throughout the ownership. All I can comment on is the bike I had, and the vibrations were noticeable compared to the 450 MT when you're doing highway speeds. The 450 MT also has a better screen in my opinion, at least stock for stock. You can get an adventure screen to give you far more protection in the accessory catalog, But if we're comparing the stock screens of each, the 450 MT has the better screen. You can adjust it on the fly as well to get the coverage you require. It also has a proper fairing as well, and you sit in the bike. So wind protection and protection from the elements, the 450 MT has the Himalayan beat. The CFMoto 450 MT comes in at 195 kilograms wet, and the Himalayan 450 comes in at 196 kilograms wet. They're not lightweights by any stretch of the imagination, but they are pretty much a decent 10 kilos lighter than the closest competitors in the middleweight category. And because of the way they carry their weight, they're really not top-heavy motorcycles. And because they don't have the same force in their engines, they don't have a big 700 or 1300cc pistons punching away, they feel a lot lighter than what they actually are. So maneuverability is worlds apart from the middleweight category. Now, weight-wise, there really isn't anything to separate these two bikes. It's 1 kilo difference. I couldn't tell you if one was lighter than the other hopping off from one to the other. They both feel almost identical to me in the way they carry their weight, how they handle their weight, and how heavy they feel to ride. The only time I noticed the weight of either bike was the Himalayan 450. When you're taking it up off the side stand, you do notice the heft of that bike then, because this bike famously has a very short kickstand, so you do feel the weight a little bit when you're taking it off the kickstand. Don't let it get in your head too much. Hop on the bike, see how it feels when you're riding and maneuvering it around, because it is really the only time you notice that weight. So I think the weight, you can't separate them, it's a tie. CFMoto 450 MT has the bigger petrol tank at 17.5 litres compared to the Himalayan 450, which has 17 litres. So you probably think, aha, finally solids, something to separate the two. Surely the CFMoto 450 MT goes further because of its bigger tank, and you'd be wrong. The Himalayan 450 is incredibly fuel economic. So it actually goes further. I got roughly 400 kilometers to a tank on the Himalayan 450, whereas I saw about 350 kilometers from the CFMoto 450 MT. But the Himalayan edges out the CFMoto 450 MT just for being more economical. It does it on a smaller tank, and if you were carrying extra fuel on the back, the Himalayan will go further on that fuel as well. Both do a decent job at giving you fairly good range out of the tanks that they have. Now let's talk about the fueling of the bike. And the 450 MT is quite snatchy down low on the throttle, the way it delivers its fuel. That can be easily sorted by just updating the bike with a more recent map of CFMoto's app that they provide. And it's a very simple process, and the bike that I rode already had that map on it. What I can say is it didn't have a snatchy throttle at all. That map really sorts all of those issues out. But if you are in a country, say you're in Europe, where there isn't a map available at the moment, that is something you might want to pay attention to. Whereas the Himalayan 450, smooth as butter throughout the rev range. You don't need to worry about a fuel mapping. It's butter smooth from 0 RPMs to its maximum. Suspension was the big one for me, where I was finally like, aha, finally something that separates them clearly and makes itself known that this suits this rider and this suits that rider. Both bikes have 200 millimeters of travel front and rear. Ground clearance is equally similar, with the CFMoto 450 MT having 220 mil of clearance and the Himalayan having slightly more at 230 mil of clearance. Now the 450 MT on paper has the better suspension. It's KYB, it's got plenty of adjustability, which is very rare at this end of the market. Whereas the Himalayan has non-adjustable forks up front and only is adjustable for preload at the rear. So you really can't dial it in like you can on the 450 MT. But surprisingly, straight out of the box, I found the Himalayan 450's suspension the better package. And this is why. The 450 MT, the suspension is set up for the guy that's going 10/10ths all the time. And that's kind of egged on as well by the character of the motor. You always feel like you want to attack, but the suspension is not plush at all. So it doesn't glide over the short, sharp hits. You feel everything. You feel very connected, but you do get bounced and knocked around. Now I didn't get a chance to fiddle with the adjustments to see whether it could be softened up. I have done a lot of reading and watched a lot of reviews saying that it can be done to some degree, but you're never going to get the plush ride that say the Himalayan 450 offers. So it is a bike with suspension for the person that does like to ride hard, unless you do want to take it to a suspension tuner or get aftermarket suspension to address that. But if you're looking for that gentleman's adventure bike to explore the back roads and be comfortable and let the suspension absorb a lot of the impact, it's not that kind of suspension. Whereas the Himalayan 450, I felt, is more well-rounded. It's not too plush, so it's not like the 300L or the 300 Rally where you really feel like you're on a pogo stick, but it's not too harsh like the 450 MT. It's just right in the middle. It's not great at any particular job. It's just good at every single thing I did on it, whether it was off-road and slower speed stuff, high-speed corrugations, out on the back roads with big potholes, or out on the open highway. The suspension just did a good job at everything I threw at the bike. As the 450 MT, I felt it was more specialized. The CFMoto 450 MT has that modern, aggressive adventure bike look. It looks fantastic. Like lots of people before me have said, it looks like a mini Tenere 700, which is a good thing. If you're wanting to look the part with your mates on bigger adventure bikes, this bike fits right in with the crowd and it looks fantastic. Aggressive look to go with that aggressive sounding engine. You can see why people are flocking to this bike. Whereas the Himalayan, I didn't find myself immediately gravitating to the looks. I saw it online. My immediate thoughts is, well, that looks better than the 411, but I know a lot of 411 owners don't like the look of this new 450 because it isn't classic enough. But for me, after riding it for a day, seeing it in that black and gold and the way the sun hits that black paint out in the bush, it really looks magic. And that classic look, whilst not making an immediate impression on me, grew on me more and more. And I realized it's a subtle, classy look and it really grows on you over time. So I found myself at the end of the review, it was really a tie emotionally. I love the look of both of these bikes. They both do very different things and they both win in their own way, because the 450 MT, we finally have a small adventure bike that looks like the big boys, proud to pull up at the meet or at the cafe to get your adventure latte, and it looks just as good as any other adventure bike on the market. And to that point, the Himalayan 450, while it might not have ubiquitous good looks of the 450 MT, it has a really classy retro vibe to it, and there's absolutely nothing on the market that looks like that Himalayan 450, which is also special in and of itself. So both of these bikes have something to offer in the looks department. So again, I think it's a tie and really depends on what you're looking for personally. And here we have two small adventure bikes, not only with spoke wheels and tubeless spoke wheels at this end of the segment, which is amazing. But on top of that, we've got 21-inch front wheels on both of these bikes, which is just mandatory for me if I'm doing proper off-road riding. While the CFMoto 450 MT does have the advantage in that it has an 18-inch rear over the Royal Enfield 17-inch rear. Now, I would say for the kind of riding I'm doing on both of these bikes, the difference was negligible. I didn't feel any handicap on the 17-inch rear in the dirt on the Himalayan over the 450 MT. Now, it might limit your tire choice a little bit, but what I will say for people that maybe are worried about the 17 over the 18 is the size is quite negligible for most people, I think. And on top of that, it's never hindered the DR650 in its ability off-road either. And while we're talking about tubeless spoke wheels, I think the CFMoto 450 MT wins this battle in the fact that tubeless is standard across the range. You don't have to pay extra for it. Whereas tubeless wheels, at least here in Australia, you can only get tubeless on the black and gold version or on the white version at an extra cost as well. But if you love your tubes and you don't want tubeless, then again, the Himalayan 450 might be the better way to go. And at the end of the day, you can get tubeless in either of these bikes. Brakes are pretty evenly matched here as well. Both bikes have a 320mm disc up front with a 2-piston caliper. At the rear, the CFMoto 450 MT has a 1-piston caliper with a 240mm disc, whereas the Himalayan 450 has a 270mm disc with a 1-piston caliper. And as you would expect, the Himalayan feels slightly better under braking. I felt like it had better bite. It is only marginal. Both bikes brake pretty well for small adventure bikes. The Himalayan definitely has the edge in feeling like it has more bite and a little more braking power. ABS ABS switches, both bikes, it's a one button click with no submenus. I will give the edge to the CFMoto 450 MT here, purely because you don't need to be at a standstill to turn the ABS off. Amazing. So many manufacturers do not do this or haven't bothered to do it for whatever reason. I think this should be standard amongst adventure bikes. End of argument. The Himalayan 450 is pretty good. You do have to pull over though, so it does lose marks over the 450 MT. But thankfully there's no submenus either. You literally hit one button, hit the ABS off map, and you're ready to rock. This is the mode button where we hit for the dirt. Rider modes, performance ABS on, rear ABS off, performance. That's what we want. There is an eco mode in both settings for ABS as well. Comfort is another tricky one. This really depends on your height, your weight, your comfort levels. A lot of different factors go into the comfort of a bike, but I will talk about it at my average height at about 182-ish centimeters. And it's a tricky one because both of these bikes do comfort well, but in different ways. The CFMoto 450 MT was the more comfortable bike on the road for me because of that wind protection from the fairing and the screen, as well as it being adjustable and the smoother engine. It also has a more comfortable seat. So for me, by a small margin, the CFMoto 450 MT wins the on-road comfort. It is slightly tarnished by the stiff suspension, so if you hit a pothole or you're going over really corrugated roads, you know it's not as plush as the Himalayan 450, but I think comfort levels overall on the road goes to the 450 MT. Now I will say the rider triangle for me, standard on the 450 MT, did feel a little bit cramped when sitting, but I do know that I wasn't on the high setting for the seat. And on top of that, you can also get a rally seat for this bike to make it even taller. So I think that would easily sort out my issues there. So I don't want to take 2 marks off being a little bit cramped when sitting on the CFMoto 450 MT. Seated though, I did prefer the ergonomics of the Himalayan despite its less wind protection and more vibrations out on the highway. Just the rider triangle, the length I had from the seat to the pegs, even on the 825mm setting, which is the lower of the two, I felt like I had more legroom and more space on the bike when seated on the road. Off-road though, everything's flipped on its head in my opinion. Both bikes, the rider triangles are set up very good for off-road. Both of these bikes, I thought to myself, if push came to shove, I wouldn't need to upgrade either of these bikes to happily ride off-road. New day, new shirt. My camera overheated yesterday because it was just so hot. Let's get back to it. Look, let's talk about the comfort off-road. With these two bikes, at least for me, I felt I really wouldn't have needed much more than maybe a different set of bars to be absolutely comfortable on these bikes. When sitting down, I did find the Himalayan to be the more natural feeling for me. It's more sitting on top of the bike. It feels a lot like a dual sport or an enduro. So I felt right at home. Whereas the CFMoto 450 MT, when you're off-road and you're sitting on the bike, you feel like you're sitting in the bike. I should note though, on the flip side, the CFMoto 450 MT feels like the skinnier bike between the legs. So when the going gets tough, you can grip the bike with your legs and you really feel in control. There's nothing sticking out or protruding to allow you to get maximum grip between the legs. Whereas the Himalayan feels a little more chonky. It's a little bit harder to get a proper grip on. Not to such a huge degree that it makes it super difficult, but it is noticeable that it isn't as streamlined and easy to grip between the legs. You can't talk about comfort without talking about the seats. Bottom line, out of the box, standard for standard, the CFMoto 450 MT has the much more comfortable seat in my experience. My bum didn't get sore nearly as quick as it did on the 450 Himalayan. In fact, I was surprised at how uncomfortable the Himalayan 450 standard seat is. Now, luckily there is an upgraded touring seat in the accessory catalog to fix those issues, but it is a little bit frustrating that an adventure bike has a pretty crap seat. Both of these bikes have fantastic seat heights as well for shorter people. Both of these bikes will pretty much go to 800mm. The Himalayan will go to 805mm in its lowest setting, and the CFMoto 450 MT will go to 800mm. So those are both bum scraping seat heights. The The Himalayan comes basically in at 9,200 right away for its base model. The CFMoto 450 MT isn't much more at 9,500 Australian dollars right away. As we know though, it isn't just the out the door price that ends up costing us money. What are the other costs involved? Servicing, warranty, what does that look like? Both bikes with warranty are evenly matched. Here in Australia, they have a 3-year warranty. In other places in the world, I have noticed different warranty lengths, but here it's 3 years. That's pretty damn good. Servicing costs. The Himalayan, you only have to service every 10,000 kilometers. Fantastic for an off-road motorcycle. The CFMoto still has an acceptable 5,000 kilometers. Now you might think, aha, that means the 450 Himalayan has won this category. Now we can all go home. Not so fast. So here's the down low with the Himalayan. Those 10,000 kilometer intervals, you have to check the valves as well. That means a much higher price for your servicing cost because there's a lot more involved in checking the valves, and if they have to adjust them, that takes even more time. So that adds a lot to the outright cost of each service. Whereas the CFMoto 450 MT doesn't need its valves looked at until well above 20,000 kilometers, which means that the services, while more frequent, are going to be far cheaper. So I think it will pretty much end up even because you're doing double the services with the CFMoto, but the services are going to be significantly more expensive for the 450 Himalayan. So I think they'll probably come out relatively equal when it comes to service costs. So which bike is easier to work on with your bare hands? I would give this win to the CFMoto 450 MT purely because to replace the air filter, you pop the seat, you chuck a new filter on, and you're ready to rock. And for changing the oil, you just dump the sun plug and you're good to go. Whereas the Himalayan, to change the air filter, you need to remove the petrol tanks, and to change the oil, you actually have to remove 2 bolts instead of 1. But let's all acknowledge it, it's splitting hairs at the end of the day. So how have they done longevity wise? Well, we've got a year basically of both of these bikes being out, or just under a year, but that's a fairly decent amount of time. I don't think it's enough time to see if there's any long-term problems with the engine because not enough people have put high kilometers on these bikes yet. But early stage reviews seem to suggest that both of these bikes are pretty damn reliable. The Royal Enfield Himalayan, all I can really find on this bike from research is that basically some of the bolts from factory can be loose. Check them, tighten them up, add some Loctite. Likewise, the CFMoto 450 MT, there doesn't seem to be anything inherently wrong with the bike in a major way, other than one little point that really has got a lot of media coverage, and deservedly so, and that's the water in frame issue. What am I talking about? There's a little hole in the frame where water can get in and run down to the bottom of the frame, and there's nowhere for it to drain out. So some people have experienced early rust in the frame, which really isn't good on a brand new bike. It is an easy fix. People have just drilled a small hole where the water generally collects at the bottom of the frame. You treat it with some rust buster and hey presto, you're ready to go. Some people have even blocked the little hole further up in the frame so water can't get in the first place. But it does seem like a little bit of an oversight considering that this bike is made for off-road. You're going to be going through water, and as far as I'm aware, haven't offered a factory fix for it either. Most dealerships will accommodate you and sort that issue out for you. And realistically, longevity wise, given that both of these bikes come with a 3-year warranty, you're going to be covered for a decent amount of time if anything does go wrong. So with its great sound, its great looks, its low-end grunt, fully adjustable suspension, I think the CFMoto 450 MT really suits the rider that's looking for something that really has a presence about it, has a little bit of pantomime, and you love the sound of a 270-degree crank, but you also like to ride hard. This bike is the kind of bike that rewards the rider for riding at 10/10ths. Because that suspension is set up so stiff, it really only works when you're riding it hard. If you're pottering around and exploring the back roads, that suspension will just beat you up. And if you don't have suspension at these prices, you're probably still going to have a few $1,000s left over to sort the suspension out anyway. The 450 MT is for the buyer looking for a mini Tenere A700. The Himalayan 450 is for the buyer that's looking for a modern KLR 650 that actually has the features you want, like 6 speeds, a sub 200 kilogram weight, and modern features that you'll actually use. It's got a gentle bottom end that really makes it approachable for new and returning riders, but it's got a top end that's just so much fun and so underrated that it'd keep anyone that loves motorcycles more than happy. And couple this with its well-rounded suspension, this bike is just a joy to ride no matter the situation that is in front of you, and I think that is the quintessential definition of an adventure bike. Good at everything, but great at nothing. And I think the Himalayan 450 appeals more to the person that just likes exploring the back roads. But the ultimate winner, I think, here to take the easy way out is the consumer, because what I want to highlight at the end of this video, if you're really getting stuck in the weeds and stressing about, oh my God, which of these two bikes should I choose? It's such a hard decision and I don't want to waste my money. Remember this, either of these two bikes is not going to be a mistake. Both of these bikes are so competent and offer so much value for money that neither of these bikes would be a particularly bad decision within reason. Both of these bikes are affordable enough that you can accessorize either of them to get them to where you want it to be without too much hassle. So let me know in the comment section below, which one did you choose, or which one are you going to choose and why? Grab your keys, get out on your bike and go make some memories. And as always, don't forget to stay shiny side up.